How about this beautiful weather, huh? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Sun. Yeah, we have other people who love the sun here as much as me. I was driving into church and thinking, what a blessing it is that we got to install air conditioning in this building last August because we couldn't have been in here tonight. On a 75-degree day, it gets to about 90 in here with no real way. And it's like a wet 90, humid 90. So what a huge gift to be able to be here in the summer in the evenings. I have a few announcements for you guys. And first of all, we are trying to get many of you signed up, I know, last week, but we're trying to get as many people as we can to shift to text alerts when there are things going on around here, because we have so many of you watching from at home and you want to know what is going on around the church. There's also the opportunity to sign up for prayer requests and be praying for needs that are going on. We have partnerships that we're doing with local missions here in our community. And so we're just excited to have a chance to be able to share that with you guys, but we're trying to find a more effective way to do it rather than it being buried in the deep, dark south of your email inbox. And so we have an online communication card. If you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on contact, at the bottom of that, you'll see when that fires up that screen, it'll say online communication card. There's an opportunity for you to click a box that says sign me up for text alerts. And we won't push text to you unless we're asking your permission to do so. So we'd love to have you go there and sign up for those. I talked a little bit about last week our partnership with Cedar Way Elementary School through the Edmonds School District and the Nourishing Network. And we get to host our summer pop-up pantry where families that have been identified as being in need through the school district's resource officers get to come and pull up to the elementary school, and we load up the trunk of their car with groceries. And so we work together with the school's PTO, and we bring items, and our items are like apples and onions and potatoes and carrots and some fresh produce that really isn't very shelf stable. So if you're interested in donating to that, we have a list going at signup.com, and if you hear this announcement, for those of you that are watching online, by Monday, that would be an opportunity for you to sign up because the pantry happens this coming Tuesday morning. And so you can drop items off here at the church. We put them on the ramp right over here that's by our playground so that it doesn't get confused with our Give or Get pantry that is for our community members that are finding themselves in need in this season. You might notice when you go to that signup.com that we also have some things and needs listed for Vision House, and that is our other partnership that we have to help eliminate poverty and homelessness by getting families back on their feet and the resources and housing that they need. It usually takes them about 5 years through that program, and then they are out on their own and doing really well. And so it's really a blessing to be able to reach out into their lives and speak into their lives in a loving way by providing some tangible things. And so we have like antibacterial wipes. If any of you can get your hands on those, or toilet paper, those are things that the families are having a hard time getting their hands on, just like all of us. So sometimes it takes a village to provide those things. So if you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on that online communication card and you say you're interested in the Nourishing Network or Vision House, we will go ahead and forward those sign-up lists to you. And thank you in advance for all that you're doing to support families in our community. It is such a big deal and such a blessing to get to do that on behalf of Brookview every month. The last thing is we are going to have soccer club. It's official. August 10th through the 14th. We are still sorting out the details of what that will look like from the moment that kids hop out of their cars to the moment that we put them back in their cars. And it will look very different than it has in the past, but it is an opportunity for us to get outside a bit in the fresh air and then just invest in kids in a big way. It's likely that we'll be wearing masks, but we're looking for volunteers. So if you cannot wear a mask and that makes you claustrophobic, probably not the event for you to sign up. But if you would be willing to do that and just celebrate kids and coach, you do not need to know much about soccer. We give you everything that you will need to know, and we help train you and get you ready to essentially play games with kids. One of my favorite is when Brian Durr with the kindergarten class plays kick the coach, and essentially all the kids have their soccer balls and they're just firing shots at him while he's running around the field. It's pretty spectacular. So if you would be willing to have kids chase you and hit you with a soccer ball, will you go to that online communication card and sign up to help us with Soccer Club? We are very excited to get the opportunity to do that. That is all that I have. I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Oh no, guys, I totally forgot a super important announcement tonight. We are going to be reducing to just one service on Saturday nights. We aren't going to do the Sunday morning service. We're just finding that it is really a lot for our volunteers. It takes a lot of staff hours and capacity for us. And so we're going to just enjoy summer a little bit while we can, and just have that one service. So we'll be filming on Saturday nights with the opportunity to come to church live and RSVP for that. We will have the childcare that we were planning to have on Sunday mornings available every Saturday night. Again, that's at 7 o'clock. You can RSVP for the church service at brookviewchurch.com, and the information and the details are there. So beginning next Sunday, we will run Saturday evening services only. We have plenty of room for everyone to come, and so please come to church. If you have been coming, keep coming, and we love seeing you. We love worshiping with you. For those of you that watch online, we want you to know that that service is going to be available for you to continue to watch if Sunday mornings are your rhythm and your routine for watching church. So we miss those of you that are not with us in person, and we cannot wait for the day when we can be together again.
Welcome, you guys. We are few, but we are mighty tonight. So we have been in this series that we're calling Who Do You Say I Am? Because these days there are all kinds, are there not, of ideas out there about who Jesus is. There is Jesus the wise sage, like in the ilk of Buddha or Confucius. There's Jesus, the social justice warrior. There's Jesus, the political revolutionary. There's Jesus, the long-haired anti-establishment, went off to college and got all these liberal ideas, hippie, right? There's a Republican Jesus. There is a Democrat Jesus. And as we've been saying, there is even, guys, what? A vegan Jesus. Which, by the way, is interesting when you think about it, because Jesus ate a lot of meat. If you remember, what was the Passover meal? What was the main thing? That was a lamb. He ate a lot of meat. He didn't eat a lot of pork, because he's Jewish and all. But I was listening to a pastor talk this week, and he was talking about the phenomenon that has become Easter ham. Right? Because nothing celebrates our resurrected Jewish rabbi like eating pork. Right? Okay, I have nothing else to say about that. I just thought it was interesting. But these last couple of weeks, I've argued that how you answer that one question, who do you say I am, will shape your life more than anything else. Like the way you envision Jesus and by default, God, will shape you. Now, I've contended that your vision of God will shape you even if you don't believe in God. Like even if you don't believe in God at all, even if you think all of life is a cosmic accident and we're simply all a product of time and chance, then that vision of humanity and that vision of God and that vision of life, it'll shape you. Like even if you don't believe in Jesus as anything at all, you'll be shaped by whatever replaces God in your value system, whatever you claim is ultimate, the meaning and purpose of life to you. See, like even if you think life is meaningless and this is all an accident, you will still come up with some kind of meaning because humans are meaning-making creatures. Like we can't live without meaning. So you will be shaped by whatever you think the meaning and purpose of life is. If that's sexual expression or individual autonomy, if that's more and more and more pleasure, if that's success or wealth or power or intelligence, getting really smart, if it's discovering the world's best IPA or traveling to the world's most beautiful destinations. Whatever it is that you think is ultimate, it will shape you. And we've been looking at this through the statement of A.W. Tozer, kind of mid-century prophet from the last century, who once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. We tend by a secret law of the soul to move toward our mental image of God, or whatever it is that we decide is ultimate and in the place of God." So we've been asking a serious question these last few weeks. What floods into your mind when you think about God? When you hear the word God or you think about him, what sort of emotions does that evoke? What do you actually imagine him to be like? And what do you think he thinks of you? Another way to ask that question is simply, who is Jesus to you? Not what answers would you give on a theological test about Jesus. Not what are the right answers so that you would get an A. I mean, like, who is Jesus to you? Like in your actual life. I mean, think about your fears. Is Jesus meeting you in them? Is he walking you through them? Think about your hurts. Is Jesus healing you and is he making you whole? Think about your dreams. Are your dreams the kinds of things that Jesus cares about? Think about your life philosophy. What do you think will make you happy? Jesus had a lot to say about the way to human flourishing. So the question is, really, did Jesus know what he was talking about? And we just did a long series on the Sermon on the Mount, like Jesus' manifesto on a completely new way to be human. His vision, in the most complete form of what it will take to get to human flourishing. But there was a lot of hard stuff in that teaching, right? This is like, you got to let go of your anger. Oh, okay. You got to love your enemies. Oh, okay. You got to resist lust. You got to judge people the way that you would want to be judged. You got to resist putting people in boxes that limit them. And don't return hurt with hurt, but instead with love. This is like core stuff to the way of Jesus. And he claimed that it would lead to human flourishing. So the question then is, did he know what he was talking about? Another way to ask this question is this: did Jesus' teaching correspond with reality? Did Jesus really know how best to be human? Did Jesus somehow have deeper insight into reality than anybody else? Like, do you believe that Jesus knew what he was talking about and that his teaching actually corresponds with reality? Now, today we're going to look at a teaching of Jesus about life. And you are going to have to decide at some point, does this teaching correspond with reality? But this is another really hard teaching, and it's one that we struggle to live. But Jesus taught that in a sense, everything spiritual, everything in life, all human flourishing, it hinges upon it. Now, before we get into it, let me give you the context of the conversation. If you were here or you happened to watch part one of this series, we began with a very famous conversation between Jesus and Peter with the disciples kind of all listening in. And today's Today's message is the continuation of that conversation. So let me just set the scene a little bit. We're picking up, this is Matthew chapter 16, verse 13. This is the part that we've already looked at, but it sets the scene. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." So Jesus is thrilled at Simon's accurate answer. And here, Jesus is so excited, he gives Simon a new title, okay, Peter, which wasn't really much a name in the first century. It was just a noun, and it meant what? What did it mean? Rock. He says to Peter, "I'm going to build my movement on you. You are going to become the cornerstone of everything I'm doing." And from there, then we see this drastic shift in the feel of the whole conversation. And here's what happens. Matthew writes, from that time on, okay, from that time of right after the conversation with Peter, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Now, 2 weeks ago, Casey talked quite a bit about this passage, if you were here or again, if you watched online, and he did a great job. It was really a fantastic message. But I want to come back to this passage, and I want to really camp in it because Jesus teaches something that is utterly foundational here, and I think that most of us are deeply prone to resist him on it. And yet, everything hinges on what he says to Peter. So I want us to really do a deep dive into this. We see Peter accurately names Jesus as the Messiah. And it says, starting now, Jesus begins to reveal what kind of Messiah he is. Okay, so he's first asking, "Who do you say I am?" They're like, "You're the Messiah." He's like, "Okay, we got part one right. And now I'm going to start teaching you what kind of Messiah I am." And he's a Messiah who will be rejected, who will suffer and die on a cross. And for us, this is no big deal, right? We hear that, we're like, "Meh, okay, tell us something we don't know. Get to something, dude." Because for us, this is the story of Jesus, right? I mean, it's what we've heard our whole lives if we've gone to church. And this all makes total sense to us, but for Peter and the rest of the disciples, this was shocking. They were expecting Jesus to become a king, to somehow, through the power of God, defeat the Roman Empire, reestablish Israel as a nation with prominence, where the people would turn from their sin, they would embrace God with their whole hearts once again, and mercy and justice would reign. So what Jesus is saying makes no sense to them. And so we see the shock and the outrage as Peter objects. Verse 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Now we can hear this story and sort of envision the scene. And Peter's like, "Hey, Jesus, just a minute. Okay, I like what you're doing and all that, but that last part, let me just give you a little coaching. Let me give you just a little word." But if you look at Matthew's language here, he says, Peter began to rebuke him. That's not like a soft, quiet, whispery sort of conversation. That is an emotive description. This is not a soft conversation. It's the same word used by Matthew elsewhere. And that same word is actually used when Jesus casts out a demon. He rebukes the demon. So Peter, this is not Peter with a soft arm around Jesus. This isn't like Peter whispering softly. This is Peter getting into Jesus's face. And the idea is, Jesus, this is incomprehensible. This is inconceivable. God would never allow this to happen to the Messiah. If you really are God's chosen one and God is with you, he would never let you suffer and be disgraced and die. What are you talking about, man? This can never happen to you, Jesus. Now, if we can be honest, I don't think this is just about his faith in Jesus as Messiah. There's more going on for Peter than just his love for Jesus or his belief in Jesus. Peter has a vested interest in Jesus and Jesus' future. Peter has his own dreams for his own life, and he is hitching his wagon to Jesus. And that has all kinds of implications. Because if you're Peter and you follow Jesus as Messiah into Jerusalem, and there he is crowned king of Israel and eventually the whole world, well, then if you're Peter, you're sitting pretty. Because maybe you are like vice president, right? Or at least like chief of staff or secretary of state. If Jesus becomes king and you're Peter, then you have this amazing role to play. Like this is Peter's dream, and he can see it. He's really sure that this is what God is doing. This is what God is up to. Question: have you ever had a dream that you were sure was going to happen? Have you ever felt like you knew exactly what God was doing, and then, shockingly, it did not go the way that you thought it would? Like, have you ever been a pastor and seen God moving through your church like crazy? Like, have you been in a spot where you could see how the story would unfold next? Like, you could see it and feel it like it was right there, and then had the whole thing come to a screeching halt because of a worldwide pandemic? Have you ever been a pastor and felt that? Maybe not. Maybe not. Thanks, Tom. But here's what I bet. I bet you have had a dream where you were sure you knew what God's plan was. And then come to find out it wasn't what God was planning at all. Peter has a plan. And he feels like he is right on the verge of seeing it, but Jesus is saying something that makes no sense. If Jesus is right, then if you follow Jesus into Jerusalem as the Messiah and you're Peter, and then he's put to death by the Roman Empire, you stand a pretty good chance of being put to death as well. So as you can imagine, Peter's gut reaction is like, no way. This will never happen to you, Jesus. So Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." So there's that. Like, number one thing at the top of the list of things you do not want to hear from Jesus is, "Get behind me, Satan." And Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me," meaning the proper place for a disciple or an apprentice is behind the rabbi, not in front. This is a gracious way of saying, Peter, you are out of place. But also, Peter, you're in my way. You stand between me and God's calling on my life. And you guys, there are people who will stand between you and God's calling on your life. And these people can be very well-meaning, just as Peter was right here. It can be a good friend. It can be a family member. It can be somebody who loves you deeply. There are people who will block God's calling on your life. And that's what's happening. And so Jesus calls Peter Satan, right? Not meaning that Peter is literally Satan, but he's playing the role of Satan. Simon is trying to get Jesus to turn back from his calling from God. Simon is trying to talk Jesus out of going to the cross. He wants Jesus to become king a different way. And he is sincere and he's well-meaning, but he doesn't get it. And Jesus doesn't mess around, right? He's like, get behind me, Satan. Now, the word Satan isn't a proper name. You know, like, hi, I'm Bob, and, you know, you're Satan. It's a title. And it just means the adversary. Just like Christ is not Jesus' last name, it's a title. Just like Peter wasn't really a name, it was more of a title for his role. And Satan simply means adversary. And Satan, the spiritual being, can use any influence that makes us turn from the way that God has for us, especially if that way is a hard way. Like, have you ever had the experience where, you guys ever had the experience where you're training for something, like physically, like maybe a marathon or a half marathon, or you're just like a 47-year-old pastor who's trying to lose weight or whatever. And so you have a diet, right? And you have this training regimen and all that, and it's really hard work, but you're trying to stay on the good path. And then your spouse or your roommate or your best friend says, hey man, I just got takeout from Big E's. I have the barbecue Memphis slaw burger. Do you want it? And you're like, no, I'm okay. And they're like, okay, yeah, but I also have the Bavarian soft pretzel sticks with the warm cheese sauce, and I have the fried Wisconsin cheese curds with marinara. And have you ever had that paired with the Scotch ale? It's like amazing. Oh my gosh. If your wife or daughter or roommate says that to you, what do you say? You say, get behind me, Satan. That's what you say, right? Now, I don't mean to like make light of a very serious story, but that's like the idea times a million. When somebody is literally between you and God's calling on your life. And so Jesus' next line, his next line is this: get behind me, Satan. He says, you are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, remember, this is 1,000 years before the invention of a sidewalk. And it was a common problem when you're walking long distances in the ancient world to trip over a stone. And keep in mind, you're barefoot or you're wearing sandals, and so stumbling on a stone could really mess you up. And Jesus is saying to Peter, you are a stumbling stone. You are a tripping rock in my path. And there's a little play on words here that we kind of lose in translation. Jesus has just renamed Simon Peter, right? Meaning the rock. And he has said, Peter, you're the man, and I am going to build my church upon you. And now he uses that same image like 4 seconds later, Peter the rock, and he says, get behind me, Satan, because you are a stumbling rock to me. Like, do you see the wordplay? The rock has become a stumbling block. The person that would become the cornerstone for the movement of Jesus, that same person has just become a tripping hazard. And there's a very important lesson here for all of us. And it's that rocks can become stumbling blocks. Simons can become Satans. Even the best leaders and teachers and pastors are human. Even me. I know, even me. You guys like, I am so human. And if you know me well, you know that. Any of us can be right in one moment and then like way off base the next. It happens. And I say this not to fill us with like anxiety or distrust of all of our leaders, but to just ground us in reality. Jesus explains what's happening to Peter. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Like, what a great line. How often does this describe any of us? I love the way Eugene Peterson translates this verse. Peter says, never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And it says, but Jesus didn't swerve. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. And guys, how often are we operating from that same place? We're making plans, we're sure that they're good, but Jesus is watching and he's like, you have no idea how God works. And I don't think Jesus is like raging mad at Peter here. I think my guess is he says this with a sigh or maybe even with a chuckle. But he's like, you don't get it. You don't see it the way God sees it. Your lens is distorted by your own heart and your own dreams and your own wishes. You see things from such a limited viewpoint. You see the way a human sees them, not the way God sees them. And then he goes on, it says, then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple. Can we pause right there? Because that's weird. I mean, that's a weird thing. Like, let's not skip over that. He said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple. Well, wait a minute. Aren't we already your disciples? Like, we've left everything and been following you for a couple of years. But in the Greek, be my disciple actually translates more literally as whoever wants to come behind me. But it gets translated, be my disciple, because it was an idiom in the first century that was simply used to mean being a disciple. And it was an idiom in the ancient language because that's what being a disciple was all about. If you became a disciple or an apprentice of a rabbi, that's what you would do. You would literally come behind them and you would follow them around everywhere. You would follow them around everywhere they would go. There's even like they talk about disciples that were so serious about this, they'd follow their rabbi to the bathroom, like trying to learn from that somehow. You would follow them as close as possible because you wanted to hear every whisper of teaching, but also you wanted to watch them live every aspect of life so that you could learn from them how to become like them. But Jesus is coming back to a really important idea. He's just said to Peter, get behind me. And now he's saying to the rest of the 12, whoever wants to, you can get behind me. You have to get behind me. And then you can be my disciple. Now, this is kind of a weird thing to say to men who are already his disciples, but the idea is that people who apprentice themselves to Jesus, people who have decided to become his disciples, we have to constantly pay attention to our position to Jesus. Are we behind him? The proper place for a disciple of a rabbi? Or are we out in front? Like, are we following Jesus, or are we off on some vain attempt to try to get Jesus to follow us? All of us can do what Simon did, just sort of jump ahead and get out of position. We get locked into whatever our vision for our life is, and then we keep praying and we keep saying, Jesus, make it happen. Jesus, bless me. Jesus, come with me. Jesus, follow me. You and me are going to be in this intimate relationship with Jesus. Follow me. Well, wait a minute. And instead of following him, we want him to follow us. But notice Jesus has a very simple invitation. There's no coercion here. There's no control. It's all just open invitation. Whoever wants, this is available if you want. Whoever wants to be my disciple, to learn from me my way, to come after me and learn how to live life, it's available. He says, but there are 3 requirements. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must, in other words, this is non-negotiable. Whoever wants to be my disciple must, number 1, deny themselves. Number 2, take up their cross. And number 3, follow me. Now, a short word on each. First off, deny yourself. What exactly does that mean? Now, I don't think he means you need to deny who you are. I mean, sometimes we get kind of scared, like, whoa, if I deny myself and I follow Jesus, am I just going to lose myself altogether? I don't think that's what he's talking about. I don't think it's about like denying your personality, the way that you're wired, like your Myers-Briggs type or your Enneagram or your introvert-extrovert preference. The New Testament writer Paul later writes about this idea of the self, and we get a lot more clarity around this. Paul uses the language of the flesh, and we talked about this. If you were here, we talked about this a lot in the fall, right? Now, what exactly is the flesh? Well, last fall we defined it very simply as the primal drive in us for self-gratification. There is a primal drive in us for self-gratification. gratification. We all have desires for self-gratification that, if indulged, will lead to chaos and destruction and ruin for ourselves and the people around us. Another way of saying it, and you really don't need to be a follower of Jesus to agree with this, but we all have desires in us that we need to self-edit. We all have desires that left unchecked will run amok. The desire for sex, or for control, or for power, or for fame, or for pleasure, the desire for comfort and ease, the desire for security. And these days, neurologists call it our animal brain. There's actually a word in science for this. Paul called it the flesh. Neurologists call it animal brain. I kind of like animal brain. But when it gets activated, what happens is all I care about is what I want. And I want it right now. And it's kind of an anti-love approach to life. And so look at what Paul writes. He says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Now, Paul was clearly speaking metaphorically, right? He was still living and breathing when he wrote this. So what part of Paul was crucified with Christ? Well, he goes on. He says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified what? The flesh with all its passions and desires. Now, notice what's been crucified is the passions of the flesh, not all of our passions. There are other passions inside of us, right? There are Christ-like passions, good from the Holy Spirit. God is in favor of them passions. But in order for those passions to take over, to become front and center, in order for them to grow, we need to kill the flesh. We need to kill the competing passions. So when Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me, that reference to deny yourself doesn't mean that you stop being you. It means the best parts of you are now set free to grow and flourish. They are fed and they grow and they spring to life, and you will actually become more of you than ever before. Do you guys see? Jesus is wanting to free you to become you. The kind of you that he knows you can be. A person with all kinds of unique passions and desires that are filled with love and selflessness. But to do that, you are going to have to crucify some stuff. And you will need to deny yourself. Okay, so secondly, Jesus says to become a disciple, you will have to take up your cross. Now, we miss Jesus if we read this as simply another way of saying deny yourself. Because this image of take up your cross is actually literal before it's figurative. And this is so easy for us to miss because we live on the other side of the world, right, in a post-Christian culture with lots of human rights. But the primary meaning of this in Jesus' day was very literal. It was, be willing to go public with your apprenticeship to me, even if it leads to death and martyrdom on a Roman cross just like me. And if you know history, that's exactly what happened. All but one of the 12 were killed, and many of them were crucified. So for the original disciples, take up your cross was very literal. Now, it's very unlikely that any of us are ever going to be crucified for our faith in Jesus. But it is good to remember that this is a reality for many disciples. This is still true for many around the globe right now, like particularly in the Middle East and also all throughout Asia. But many of us, we're not going to be crucified or put to death for our faith in Jesus. We will have to make sacrifices for our faith. Like maybe you work in an environment, like you're just in an industry or you're in a company where corners get cut. And to get ahead, to really get ahead, you have to do unethical things. And if you refuse to do those things, it might cost you. If you refuse to do those things, it might cost you a sale or a promotion or a rise in the company. It might even cost you your job. So in this season of online education, our seventh grader, Brooklyn, she had PE. What does PE look like in an online forum for a seventh grader through Zoom? That's a great question. I think it meant that she needed to stay active on her own and then report it. And I was like, sweet, we can do that. So I was taking Brooklyn, okay, my seventh grader, and her sister Kate to do like very intensive basketball type training 3 days a week. Kate's a collegiate basketball player, and so I was working them out together. Brooke loves basketball, and I figured that would suffice for her PE credit, right? For her PE requirement. An hour and a half, 3 times a week of intensive basketball training. Are you kidding me? What seventh grader's doing more than that? This should cover the requirement. Wrong. In spite of anything else she was doing, the middle school required, the PE department required that she be doing certain very specific, very lame exercises. And Brooklyn overlooked the requirement, and because I'm dad of the year, I did too. And so guess what? Brooklyn got a C in PE. Yes, she got a C in PE. You know why? You know why she got a C in PE? Because she wouldn't lie. She wouldn't say she did what she didn't do. She would not say that she did what she just refused to lie about it. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why? She's like, no, Dad, I follow Jesus. Oh, it's a C in PE. It's in 7th grade. How are you going to get to college? Right? But if you do things the Jesus way, there are lots of times in this life it will cost you. And those are kind of tame examples. You will need to deny yourself. You will need to take up your cross. And there will be sacrifices along the way. But the third part of this is really what makes it all worth it. Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross. And then third, he says, follow me. Guys, when we think about this, this is the invitation of a lifetime to learn somehow to be with Jesus so that we can become like Jesus and then do the kinds of things Jesus would do if he were in our place. This is the very thing that breathes the deepest kind of life into us. If we let go and we open up, Jesus can actually pour life into us. This is what he's saying. So he continues. He says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Now, the Greek word that is translated life in verse 25 and soul in verse 26 is actually the same word, which is a little tricky when you're translating. But here's something useful to know. It is the same word, life and soul. And it's the word psyche, which is where we get the word psyche. Okay, it's where we get the idea of psyche and this part of your personhood or the whole field of study of psychology. And it means more than just like the biological sense of life. It means your life in the more like metaphysical or deeper sense. It means your whole being. It means your soul, all of you, your psyche. If you're trying to cling to it, Jesus says, you'll lose it. But if you lose it for the sake of Jesus, you'll find it. Now notice how Jesus phrases that. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for me will find it. The point is, like, this is not a command. And it's not a rule to follow. This is simply a statement about reality. And this is one of my favorite things about the teaching style of Jesus that I'm beginning to see more and more all through the Gospels. So many of Jesus' teachings don't end with a rule to follow. Instead, they end with a statement about reality. They end with a statement about how life actually works. The goal of Jesus' teaching wasn't just behavior modification. Jesus wasn't teaching people to be nicer or happier or whatever. Instead, the goal of Jesus' teaching was to help people to begin to live in congruence with reality. How to show up to the reality of God and other people and a broken world. How to show up to the reality that all of us have a soul, that we are more than biology. We are flesh and we are spirit. Jesus is naming reality and inviting us to learn how to navigate it with him. And what Jesus names here is staggering about reality. He says, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." You guys, what if that's true? What if Jesus is naming reality? What if this isn't a command or a rule to follow? What if Jesus is simply explaining to us the way life works? If you are willing to surrender your life to Jesus, you will find life. But if you cling to your life and you refuse to surrender it, you're going to lose it. What if that's actually true? What if this is the whole key to begin experiencing what it is we long for most deeply? Now, you can find other pleasures in life. Jesus isn't saying you can't. You can find other pleasures in life, to be sure. But what if he knows what he's talking about, and apart from Jesus, those pleasures are always temporary? What if they simply cannot fill you in the way that you want? What if only Jesus has what you need and he is desperate to lead you to it? But you have to be willing to lay down your life for him. You guys, I've now been following Jesus for over 25 years. And so I am brand new to this in a sense. But the one thing that I can say for sure about my adventure with Jesus is that it has gone in directions that I never imagined. The highlights of my life have been the Jesus things. The deepest, most soul-filling things have always been the Jesus things. And I've been filled by the craziest stuff, like the weirdest stuff, the stuff that I would have never seen coming, stuff I wouldn't even had wanted to be a part of prior to being a follower of Jesus. Let me give you just a couple of examples. Right after I started following Jesus, I met a girl. And she was attractive, and she was fun, and she was exciting, and she was wild. And she was, in a sense, the perfect girl for the pre-Jesus Jason. And we went on a few dates, and even though they were super fun, I had this deep sense in my soul that she was wrong for me. That I could not follow her and Jesus at the same time. So before things even got rolling, after just a couple of weeks, I ended it. A couple of years later, I met this amazing Christ-following girl named Jenny York. And this time, the Spirit in me said, "You better marry that girl." And so I did. And we have been on this amazing adventure together. But as I think about it, had I not given up on the other girl the years before, had I followed her and had I married her and had I had kids with her, I would have a totally different life. I'd have a totally different life. I'd probably be very separate from Jesus. Don't even know that I'd still be following Jesus. And however broken, however messy, however spiritually empty that might have turned out, here's the crazy thing. If I had gone that route, I would never know the difference. I'd never know what I was missing out on, what was available had I willingly laid down my life for Jesus. Now, after getting engaged, Jen and I started dreaming about this life of ministry, because that's what happens when you connect yourself to someone who is just passionately in love with Jesus and gorgeous. That doesn't have anything to do with it, but We started dreaming about a life of ministry, dreaming about a community of people like that would be following Jesus together and being a part of that community, like knowing those people and leading that community and serving that community and finding ways to lay down our life for it. And so we said yes to that. It was something, it was a passion that God just we began to feed it, and God just fanned it into a flame. And over the years, we have laid down a lot for it. But what we have let go or set aside, I will tell you this, it pales compared to the joy that we've experienced again and again. There have been so many highlights. I'm going to close. I just want to tell you about two of them. The first one was an outdoor wedding in the craziest weather. We married two people that we loved with all of our hearts, Tony Ellersick and Rebecca Dumanis. And you guys, they're in this room, and I have to tell you, it was the most amazing day. First of all, we could not have loved either of them any more as individuals. I mean, really. But we were so excited for them and for their new life together. And their wedding was epic. It was outdoors in this scenic, picturesque, beautiful venue. But you guys, the weather was ominous. So Jen said, because she's an activist, she said, we better be prepared. And she made sure there was an option of having tents over the guests for the ceremony. And sure enough, when Rebecca came down the aisle, there were peals of thunder that gave everybody there chills. And every time it thundered, the crowd cheered. And then, the rain came, and it was like a monsoon on a tropical island. It was nuts, and the wind was blowing. It was crazy, but everyone was smiling and laughing, and the ceremony went on anyway, and it was beautiful. Because, you guys, I killed it. It was so good. Yeah. But also, the Spirit of God was present. And there was so much joy from everybody everywhere because they were so in just belief that this was a good and beautiful thing. It was a beautiful, God-soaked moment. And then after the ceremony just came pure joy because the reception was just killer. And it wasn't so much about the music and the dancing or the incredible beer from Big E's. It was about the community. It was about that community being in one place together. These people that we love deeply. And it was about the beginning of a new adventure for a beautiful couple. And you guys, there have been so many moments like that over the years. We could spend till next Sunday with me just telling you about beautiful moments. Let me tell you about one more. It was my privilege to know an amazing guy named Chris Perry. He came to our church as a teenager, just a punk, and I baptized him. And not long after that, I performed his wedding to his beautiful bride, Alicia. And then I dedicated one little daughter, and then I dedicated another little daughter. And we did a lot of life together with Chris and Alicia and their girls. And Chris was a good friend. But as most of you are well aware, Chris had terminal cancer. And after a long, long battle, we lost him. And I will never, ever forget the day of his death. Jen and I were at a pastor's conference that we go to every year in Cannon Beach, Oregon. And Alicia sent us a text early in the morning, and it simply said, Chris passed this morning. Now, he had been on hospice at home for quite some time, He was not conscious, and we knew that the end was near. And Jen and I considered, and in fact said, I don't think we should go to Cannon Beach, but Alicia insisted that we go. And so we promised to come back if needed. And so I got that text. We packed up immediately, and we headed back. We got to the Perry house in the early afternoon, and we drove like mad to beat the Perry girls home from school. And when they walked in the door, Alicia sat them down. And she held one and Jen held the other. And she said 2 words. Daddy died. And we spent that night crying with them. We spent that night hugging them. We spent that night telling stories about all kinds of stuff. And sometimes we would laugh. And then that, you know how it happens, that laugh turns into a cry. But we were present. We were there. And you know what else? Jesus was present. Jesus was present. And despite all of that overwhelming grief, there was something beautiful and something spiritual in all of it. In fact, like as we were there, I could feel Jesus through all of my own mourning and all of my own confusion and inadequacy about what to do. In a moment like that, I could feel Jesus breathing life into my soul. Now, here's why I bring up these two like very opposite ends of the spectrum examples. I bring it up because Jesus has led me to people and to places that have blown my mind, places and people that have touched me deeply. Again, I could go on and on and on. And these are not the kinds of things that I was looking for. Like apart from Jesus, I would have had no interest in them, and I certainly would have missed them completely. And here's what I know about me. I resist Jesus all the time, still. I can become the stumbling block at any moment. I can put myself out front, and when I do, what happens is I miss out on the beautiful stuff that he wants to do. I lose out on the life that Jesus is desperate to pour into me. But even in my limited capacity to lay myself down, Jesus has met me again and again. He has worked beauty and he's worked life into my soul. He has filled me in ways that I would have never predicted. Now, I could have missed it, and thankfully I haven't. In my 20 years with Jesus, in ways that I can't explain, I have found his words to align with reality again and again and again. When I try to save my life, I lose it. But when I lose my life for Jesus, I find it. And so I just want to close by asking you about you. Who is Jesus to you? Do you believe that Jesus' teaching actually corresponds to reality? And if so, where do you need to let go of something for Jesus? Where do you need to make a sacrifice or just quit clinging? What is it that you cling to these days? Because what if you let go of that and then you found life and joy beyond your wildest dreams on the other side because Jesus met you? Peter was clinging to a dream for his life that was impossible. But it wasn't just impossible, it was inferior. It was a dream that was so much less than what God was actually wanting to do. So what if you are clinging to something like Peter in a similar way? And what if you were to let it go? What if you were to lay it down for Jesus? And what if Jesus were to fill you with life? Father in heaven, again and again and again, I have wrestled with this. I get in my mind what I want. I get in my mind what's good and right. And I get out in front. And when you're not providing what I think you should provide or doing what I think you should do, I start rebuking you. Jesus, I don't want to be that kind of a disciple. And you're teaching me and I'm learning, but I pray that you would just continue. And I pray for all of us here that you would help us to identify arenas of our life where we're not getting behind you. We're out in front, we're leading, we're making demands of you, and we have a vision for something that is so inferior to your vision. And so, Jesus, would you humble us? See how good you are and simply follow you. Amen.